She wasn't supposed to be there. The maid moved through the hall like a ghost, silent, careful, invisible. Crystal chandeliers reflected on polished floors, laughter bounced off marble walls, and the powerful men around her spoke in low, dangerous voices. To them, she was nothing. Just a servant. Another shadow. But tonight, she was everything. She stopped in front of him. The Korean Mafia boss. Calm. Untouchable. King of a world where fear meant power and silence meant survival. No one dared approach him like this. No one, except her. She set his glass down slowly, deliberately, letting her fingers brush the rim. And then, without a single person noticing, she slid something else onto the tray. A photograph, burnt at the edges as if fire itself had tried to erase it. At first, he barely glanced. Trash. Nothing important. But something prickled at the back of his mind. He picked it up. And his world stopped. In the faded photo, a woman smiled at him. His wife. His wife who had died in a massacre 20 years ago. Beside her, a little girl with wide eyes, soft cheeks, and a face he had dreamt about every night. His daughter. His lost, vanished daughter. Alive. Can you imagine seeing someone you thought was gone forever? Hit like if you felt that shock with him. And make sure to subscribe, you don't want to miss what happens next. His fingers tightened around the photo. His chest constricted. Breathing became difficult, as if the air itself had betrayed him. He looked up. The maid was still there. Watching. Not bowed, not pleading, not afraid. Just standing. Quiet. Calm. Dangerous in her patience. 20 years had passed, but her gaze held a weight that demanded recognition. The room was loud. Music played. Glasses clinked. Laughter surrounded them like smoke. But he heard nothing. Nothing except the truth staring back at him. For the first time in decades, the most feared man in Seoul felt unsteady. Vulnerable. She did not speak. She did not cry. She did not run. She just waited. And in that stillness, he felt the impossible. The past was alive. The mistake he had buried under power and violence had returned to demand reckoning. His heart beat faster. His mind raced. Every memory he had tried to lock away surged forward, the screams of that night, the flames, the betrayal he never saw coming. And now, the child he thought was gone stood in front of him, grown, silent, and lethal in her patience. And he realized something he had never feared before: she was not just his daughter. She was more dangerous than anyone he had ever faced. More dangerous than rivals. More dangerous than betrayal. The world he had built with blood and fear, the empire he had ruled with steel and silence, it belonged to her now. And she had been waiting. Waiting for this moment. Waiting for him to see her. And for the first time in his life, he was afraid. 20 years ago, the mansion was a nightmare set on fire. Flames swallowed walls and ceilings. Smoke crawled through the halls like a living thing, curling around doors and choking anyone who tried to escape. Gunshots rang in the dark, echoing off marble floors. Screams tore through the night. It was chaos, pure and unrelenting, a storm that no one could control. His wife died in those flames. Her scream, sharp and trembling, still haunted him. She had fought to protect something he had failed to see. Her life ended in the blink of an eye, leaving him with nothing but ashes and blood. And his daughter, his little girl, 5 years old, vanished. No body. No trace. Just a small pair of shoes left by the doorway, and the smoke curling where she had disappeared. Everyone said she had been kidnapped by rivals. Everyone assumed she was gone forever. He believed it. For years, he buried the pain under power. Under violence. Under silence. He built walls around his heart as strong as the steel gates of his mansion. He ruled the streets, crushed enemies, and gained wealth beyond reckoning, but the void inside him never healed. His daughter's laugh, the soft tug of her hand in his, the way she called him "father" with trust in her tiny voice, those were gone. Lost to the night. But the truth was something else entirely. She hadn't been taken by enemies. Not by rivals. Not by strangers. She had been hidden. His wife had made a choice in the seconds before death. A choice he had never known. She had seen betrayal where he hadn't looked. She had seen danger in someone he called a friend. The friend he trusted most, the one who had been beside him since the beginning, had helped plan the attack. His own world had been poisoned from the inside. Knowing he would not believe her, knowing the chaos would swallow everything in seconds, she acted. She took the only measure she could to save their daughter. She handed the child to someone she trusted, someone loyal. She sent her away, out of sight, out of reach, into a world he would never find her in. And then she died. The mansion burned. The empire survived. But the child, the girl who should have been his, vanished into shadows. No one knew where she went. He never knew. He mourned her as though she had been ripped from him by enemies. And in his grief, he never questioned the world around him. He built walls of iron and fear, believing strength would replace loss. He buried everything, the truth, the betrayal, the secret hope that she was alive somewhere, deep in the darkest corners of his mind. And for 20 years, he ruled, blind to the reality he could not see. The daughter he thought was dead had been hidden. Waiting. Watching. Growing. And now, unknowingly, she had returned to the world he controlled, silent, unseen, but closer than he could imagine. And the empire he had built on fire and fear was about to meet the one person who could change everything. Before the fire, before the screams, before the night swallowed their world, she had known something no one else saw. His wife, pale but fierce, had discovered a betrayal that cut deeper than any bullet. The man he trusted most, his closest friend since childhood, the one who laughed at his jokes, stood beside him in every deal, every celebration, every secret whispered in the dark. He was working with their enemies. The rival gang that would burn the city, the family, their lives, he had invited them in. She had tried to warn him. Late nights, whispered words, evidence hidden under papers and envelopes. He is not what he seems, she said. The attack is coming. He is helping them. He didn't listen. Not because he was cruel. Not because he didn't love her. But betrayal from a brother, a friend, a man he had trusted since youth, was unimaginable. His mind could not process it. His heart could not allow it. He thought she was scared, hysterical, imagining threats in shadows. And so she acted alone. She made a choice that no one could ever understand. She took the only life she could save, her daughter. 5 years old, innocent, small enough to carry in her arms, fragile enough to vanish in the chaos. It was not a kidnapping. It was protection. That night, while the mansion burned and bullets tore through the halls, she handed Jessica to someone she knew would keep her safe. Someone loyal. Someone who would raise the child hidden from the violence, from the world that had become poison. And then she returned to the chaos. To the screams, to the fire, to the impossible choice of fighting for what little time she had left. The bullet that found her came not from mercy, but from betrayal. Her plan succeeded in part, her daughter lived. But she would never live to see her grow. When the dust settled, when the smoke cleared, everyone believed the child was gone forever. Kidnapped, killed, lost. Even he believed it. The Mafia boss buried the girl in his mind along with his wife, replacing grief with anger, rage, and cold ambition. No one questioned it. No one knew. No one remembered the quiet handoff in the shadows. The small figure carried through alleys, through darkness, through streets no one would trace. A child saved by a mother who understood sacrifice better than most understood love. For 20 years, the secret lay hidden, wrapped in silence and shadow. The friend who betrayed them remained at the boss's side, smiling, trusted, untouchable, carrying the weight of his deception like a crown. The world never guessed he had turned the knife from within. And the girl, the daughter he thought was dead, grew in safety far from the life she should have known, her mother's plan invisible, perfect, and cruel in its necessity. She remembered nothing of the night except the fire in her dreams, the sharp smell of smoke, the feeling of being carried by hands she could not see. No one knew she had survived. No one except her mother, for the briefest moment in her life, when she made the hardest choice a parent could make. And now, 20 years later, the daughter had returned, unseen, unknown, but closer than the boss could imagine, ready to undo everything he believed about loyalty, family, and power. Years had passed since the fire swallowed her world, since the screams of that night had burned into her memory. Jessica returned to Seoul, but not as anyone would recognize. Not as a princess. Not as a Mafia heir. She came back as a nobody. A maid. She scrubbed floors in the mansion that had once been her playground, once filled with laughter, warmth, and the feeling of belonging. Now it smelled of polished wood, rich perfume, and fear disguised as elegance. Every corridor, every staircase, every gleaming chandelier reminded her of what she had lost, and what she had survived. She moved quietly, unnoticed, as she always had to be. Hands steady, head bowed, eyes sharp. She carried silver trays, refilled glasses, dusted tables, and listened to whispered deals and laughter she had no right to hear. The people in the mansion never thought about her, never looked beyond her uniform. To them, she was nothing. Invisible. And that was exactly what she wanted. She watched him every day. Her father. The man whose presence had once been the center of her small world. He walked past her without ever seeing her. He gave orders, smiled at powerful men, laughed softly at jokes she remembered from her earliest memories, and never noticed that she moved in the same halls he ruled. To him, she was a shadow. A servant. A ghost in the corners of his empire. And sometimes, that hurt more than the fire, more than the screams, more than knowing she had lost her mother forever. Because she wanted him to see her. She wanted him to recognize her. To know that she had survived. That she was here. That she remembered. But she could not. Not yet. Patience had become her armor. Every tray she carried, every floor she polished, every whispered observation was a step closer to the moment she could claim what had been taken from her. She could not let emotion ruin her plan. Not yet. So she watched. Learned. Remembered. Waited. She noticed how he paused sometimes when looking at portraits, how he touched certain objects with a fleeting hesitation. She observed his habits, the way he trusted some and dismissed others, how he ruled with fear and respect intertwined. Every detail mattered. Every movement, every word, every glance would one day be a piece of the puzzle she would complete. And even though he did not notice her, even though he passed her by as though she were nothing, she held a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she could remain close to him, unseen, unnoticed, ready. The girl who had once been stolen, hidden, and lost was no longer a child. She had grown. She had learned. She had waited. And soon, the world that had forgotten her would remember. But for now, she remained a nobody. Invisible. Silent. Dangerous in her patience. And she watched, always watched, the man who did not know he had already lost more than he could imagine. The chief security guard had noticed her long before anyone else. Not her uniform. Not the tray she carried. Not the way she bowed or the silence she kept. It was her eyes. Sharp, steady, watching everything but revealing nothing. The way she moved through the hall, quiet and careful, yet fully aware of every detail. Her face, so familiar, yet changed, haunted him. She looked too much like the woman he had once known, too much like someone who should have been gone forever. He suspected the truth before anyone else could. This girl, this maid, was not ordinary. She was not just another servant sent to sweep floors and refill glasses. He knew. Deep down, he knew she was connected to the boss's past, to the tragedy that had destroyed their lives. He could see it in her eyes. The same defiance, the same intelligence, the same shadow of loss that had belonged to the mother she had lost. But he didn't say a word. He kept her close. A maid was easy to control. A daughter could not be trusted. A daughter could see too much, remember too much, and ruin everything he had worked for. By keeping her near as someone insignificant, he could watch her, manipulate her, and keep her from discovering the secrets he wanted hidden. Every humiliation she faced. Every insult tossed in passing. Every injustice, no matter how small, he allowed it. He smiled while others laughed. He nodded while others whispered. He let the world believe she was nothing, and she believed it too. Because as long as she was small, as long as she bowed her head and served without question, his plans were safe. His loyalty to the rival gang, the betrayals he had hidden for decades, the lies he had spun into the walls of the mansion, everything was safe as long as she didn't see, as long as she didn't remember, as long as she didn't grow into someone who could fight back. But even in his careful control, he felt the pull of danger. Something about her could not be tamed. The way she watched, the way she waited, the quiet patience in her stance, it was unnatural for someone her age. He had seen cunning before. He had seen cleverness. But this was different. This was precision. This was survival shaped into a weapon. He feared her, even as he kept her close. Every day he watched her move through the halls, unnoticed by everyone else, and he wondered if she would ever know the truth. He wondered if the girl he thought he could control would one day see everything he had done. He wondered if the little spark he had tried to bury in her would turn into a fire he could not extinguish. And yet, he did nothing. He continued to watch. To wait. To allow her to serve while he controlled the shadows around her. He had made a choice, just like her mother had made a choice 20 years ago. He would not reveal her. He would not expose her. He would not risk his plans. The maid moved through the hall, quiet, invisible, but he could not stop noticing her. He had underestimated the danger. And that mistake could cost everything. For years, Jessica did not reveal herself. Not because she was afraid. Not because she lacked courage. She had survived fire, betrayal, and a world that had tried to erase her. No, she stayed hidden because she was watching. Every word. Every gesture. Every secret tucked behind the smiles and laughter of the mansion. She needed to understand. She needed to see the man who had been her father, the man who had built an empire of power and fear, and ask herself the hardest question of all, was he a victim? Or had he been part of the system that destroyed her mother? Some days, she hated him. She hated the way he had ignored warnings, the way he had buried himself in ambition while the people he loved suffered. She hated the coldness in his eyes, the way he carried himself as if nothing could touch him. Other days, she felt a sharp stab of pity. He had lost her. He had lost her mother. He had been deceived by betrayal so close it burned. And yet, he survived. He endured. He ruled. And in that endurance, she sometimes saw a man who had loved, and lost, and suffered in ways she could not measure. And sometimes she planned something darker. She watched the halls, the guards, the men who whispered in corners, the women who smiled too sweetly. She catalogued every detail. Every weakness. Every secret. She traced the path of betrayal that had stolen her mother from the world and wondered who else was still hiding behind masks. It was not vengeance that drove her, at least not yet. It was knowledge. The truth. I didn't come back to find my father, she would later admit, when the time came for confessions, for revelations, for the world to tilt and shake. I came back to find the truth. She walked the same halls she had once run as a child, her small feet long gone, replaced by careful steps that went unnoticed. Her eyes absorbed everything, who deferred to whom, who whispered to whom, which hands trembled, which smiles were forced. Every detail mattered. Every observation was a thread she would one day pull. She learned who could be trusted and who would betray. She learned how power flowed, how fear shaped loyalty, how silence protected lies. And through it all, she remained invisible, a ghost moving through her own past. Her father never saw her. Her enemies never saw her. Even the man who had betrayed them, the chief guard, never saw her fully, though he suspected something. She had become patience and shadow. She had become watching and waiting. And she had become a quiet storm, building, learning, preparing for a moment that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he controlled. For years, she had hidden. For years, she had watched. And now, she was ready to move. The mansion buzzed with excitement. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, laughter echoed off marble floors, and the city's most powerful elites had gathered to witness the next step in the Korean Mafia boss's life. He was preparing to marry again, a union that promised power, influence, and the illusion of stability. Her name was soft, elegant, yet impossible to ignore. The fiancé moved through the hall with calm precision, every step calculated, every gesture perfect. She smiled at everyone, her intelligence shining in polite conversations, the kind of woman everyone adored and respected. But Jessica saw what others could not. The way the fiancé watched her. Not casually, not politely. But with focus. With calculation. Every glance measured, every smile hiding something sharp. Her questions were too many, too pointed, too precise. She asked about the mansion, the staff, the guards, the smallest details of the boss's daily life. And every time she spoke, Jessica felt the chill of awareness, this was no ordinary woman. Slowly, a truth began to crystallize in Jessica's mind. The fiancé was not innocent. Not a lover. Not an ally. She was a spy. Sent by the rival gang that had burned the boss's world 20 years ago, the same gang that had killed her mother, the same gang that had stolen her childhood. And worse, she suspected who Jessica really was. Did you see that coming? Share this video with someone who loves twisty mafia stories, they'll thank you later. Every polite smile, every careful question, was a trap. Every glance, a test. Jessica's heart raced, but her face remained calm. She had survived fire, betrayal, and years of hiding. She would not give away her secret. Not now. Not ever. The fiancé lingered near the boss during the reception, laughing at his jokes, nodding at his words, her hands brushing against his arm in a calculated display of trust. Everyone around them believed she was charming, loyal, perfect. But Jessica's eyes saw the cracks, the subtle tension when she looked at the guards, the way she paused when she passed Jessica, the tiny flicker of suspicion in her eyes that no one else could detect. This woman, about to become queen of the mansion, was a weapon disguised in silk and pearls. Jessica had to remain invisible, hidden in plain sight. She watched the fiancé's every move, memorized her gestures, recorded her questions and whispers in her mind. Every detail mattered. Every observation was a thread she could pull to unravel the fiancé's lies. And Jessica realized something terrifying. The boss, her father, could not see it yet. He trusted the wrong woman. He smiled at the fiancée, unaware that danger had entered his home in human form. The rival gang had already infiltrated the mansion, hidden in the laughter and elegance of the elite. And the person closest to the throne was their agent. Jessica clenched her fists quietly under her uniform. The battle had already begun, even if no one else noticed. She would survive. She would expose the truth. And when the time came, the fiancé's carefully built mask would shatter in a way that would shock the entire Mafia world. For now, she waited. Invisible. Patient. Dangerous. And the fiancé, smiling too sweetly, did not yet know who she was truly dealing with. The mansion shimmered under crystal chandeliers, music flowing like silk through the grand hall. Guests in expensive suits and dresses laughed, toasted, and whispered deals that could shift power in the city. The Korean Mafia boss moved among them with calm authority, every eye following him, every voice bending toward his presence. And she moved among them too. Quiet. Invisible. The maid nobody noticed. But tonight, she held the power that no one in the room could see. She approached him, tray in hand, step steady, eyes locked just enough to meet his without drawing attention. Beside his glass lay something no one expected, a burnt photograph. Edges blackened, paper fragile, hiding a past that had been buried in fire and lies. He picked it up. At first, curiosity flickered in his eyes. Then recognition. Then silence. The room buzzed around them, but for him, the world had stopped. In the faded photo, he saw her mother, alive in the moment before death, and a little girl, 5 years old, smiling at him. His daughter. His lost, vanished child. His fingers froze. His mind raced. His empire, his life, his control, all of it blurred into one impossible reality. Later that night, in his private office, Jessica did not kneel. She did not cry. She did not beg. She laid out the truth with precision. Facts. Names. Connections. Evidence she had gathered for years while moving unseen through his world. Your closest friend betrayed you, she said quietly. The one you trusted most helped the rivals. Your fiancée. She's their agent. And your empire, it's being eaten from the inside. He listened in silence, the kind of silence that echoes through a room heavier than thunder. He had ruled with fear, built walls of steel and fire, but he had never imagined the betrayal within his own walls. Each name she revealed, each link between rival gang and traitor, struck him like a knife. Every person he had trusted, every system he had built, every shadow in his mansion was connected to the people who had tried to destroy him decades ago. And the most terrifying truth, his daughter was the only person who saw it. The only person who had watched, learned, and waited long enough to understand the entire web of lies and betrayal. He had thought he controlled everything. That his empire was unbreakable. That power and fear would protect him. Now he understood he had been blind. And yet, he did not shout. He did not rage. He did not act impulsively. He simply looked at her. The girl who had survived fire, betrayal, and years in the shadows. The girl who had returned not for love, not for reunion, but to uncover the truth. For the first time, he saw her clearly. And he realized something more dangerous than any rival gang, any bullet, any betrayal. She was more than his daughter. She was the reckoning he had never anticipated. The empire had survived fires, bullets, and enemies outside its walls. But tonight, it was being judged from within. And the judge was Jessica. The mansion had never been quieter. The celebrations were over, the guests gone, and the city's most dangerous men and women believed the boss was back in control. They did not know that the real storm had already begun. He moved through his empire, punishing traitors one by one. The chief guard. The business associate who had whispered to rivals. The politicians who had quietly shifted alliances. Every betrayal was met with measured wrath, every disloyalty crushed under his authority. He believed he was in control. That he was the hunter. That the empire he had built with fire, blood, and fear would bend to his will. And then he realized he was wrong. Jessica had been ahead of him from the start. Every secret she had uncovered, every enemy she had mapped, every betrayal she had predicted, it had all been done long before he even knew she existed in his world. While he punished those who had betrayed him, she had already laid the trap. She had collected proof of every conspiracy, every lie, every hidden connection in the city and inside his mansion. She had moved silently through his empire, watching, learning, recording, planning. He had thought he was the mastermind. He was not. She had designed the collapse of the conspiracy. She had predicted every move, every countermeasure, every reaction. Each punishment he delivered, each person he eliminated or exposed, played perfectly into the plan she had built years ago. She was invisible, untouchable, and far more dangerous than any rival gang. He realized, with a chill he had not felt since the massacre 20 years ago, that his daughter was not just clever. She was lethal in her patience, terrifying in her precision, and unstoppable in her strategy. And for the first time, the Mafia boss felt fear. Not of enemies. Not of bullets or betrayal. Not even of fire. But of his own daughter. She had taken the girl who was hidden, invisible, underestimated, and made her a weapon against the men who thought they were untouchable. She had become the reckoning he had never anticipated, the force that could dismantle his empire without firing a single shot. He walked through the halls, observing quietly. The same halls where she had once served unnoticed, now seemed charged with her presence. He remembered her eyes that night at the ceremony, the calm, the focus, the patience, and realized she had never been powerless. She had never needed him to fight for justice. She had been doing it all along, silently, meticulously, dangerously. The Mafia boss understood the truth, the empire had survived fire, betrayal, and enemies outside. But the daughter he thought he could protect, guide, or control. She was more dangerous than he ever imagined. And if he underestimated her again, it could destroy everything he had built. For the first time in his life, he was not the most dangerous person in the room. And she was smiling quietly, knowing it. The hall was full of power, wealth, and fear. But tonight, no one laughed. No one whispered deals. No one moved without watching their back. The chief security guard, once untouchable, once the right hand of the Korean Mafia boss, stood at the center of attention, but he was no longer a man of power. He had been exposed. Not killed. Not quietly erased. Humiliated in front of the people who had followed him, the rivals who had whispered with him, the allies who had once bowed to his authority. Stripped of rank, arrested, his reputation shredded. Every connection he had relied on, every secret he thought protected him, collapsed overnight. Businesses that had thrived under his control faltered. Reputations burned. Allies turned their backs. And he realized something too late, his empire could be dismantled without bullets, without fire, without violence. Just by truth. Then came the final target. The fiancée. She stood in the hall like a queen among the ruins, calm, poised, flawless. Her hair reflected the chandeliers, her smile polite, her eyes sharp and cold. The crowd fell silent as she was called forward. The rival gang, the politicians, the elite guests, all of them leaned in, curious, waiting to see what the boss would do. Jessica had revealed everything. Every lie. Every betrayal. Every shadow of conspiracy that had crept into the mansion. The fiancé's network, her hidden communications, her alliances with the rival gang, all laid bare. When confronted, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't falter. She smiled. You think you won because she's your daughter? Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried through the hall like a whip. She's the reason your empire will fall. The words echoed. The walls seemed to vibrate. The chandelier above shook slightly, as if even the mansion feared what had been spoken. The boss's hands clenched. Rage flared, but it was controlled. He had learned restraint from years of survival, and he had learned patience from his daughter. He knew violence could destroy, but humiliation, exposure, and fear could destroy deeper. And he also knew Jessica had already planned the next move. The fiancé's calm was a mask, but her smirk revealed fear underneath, the first real fear she had ever felt. The crowd watched as the fiancé's allies fell one by one. Businesses collapsed. Secrets were revealed. Names once whispered in shadows were shouted aloud. And through it all, the boss remained silent, eyes on the woman who had dared infiltrate his life. For the first time in decades, power had shifted quietly, without fire, without blood. The empire had survived attacks, betrayal, and enemies outside its walls. But now, the traitors had fallen. Humiliated. Broken. Exposed. And the final reckoning was only beginning. Because the girl who had returned as a maid, the daughter they had all forgotten, had rewritten the rules. And no one, not even the fiancé, would survive unscathed. The mansion was quiet again. The echoes of punishment, betrayal, and shattered power had faded into the polished floors and crystal chandeliers. The guards had been dismissed, the rivals had fled, and the elites had whispered their way out of the mansion, their faces pale from the night's revelations. Only two people remained. Father and daughter. Not boss and maid. Not king and servant. Just two strangers connected by blood, fire, and loss. The room smelled of polished wood and old memories, a quiet tension hanging between them heavier than any weapon. He sat across from her, the man who had once ruled with fear and silence. The man whose decisions had shaped lives and empires. The man who had buried grief beneath power for 20 years. And he asked the question he had avoided for decades. Why didn't you tell me earlier? His voice was low, measured, yet it trembled slightly under the weight of everything he had lost, everything he had failed to see. Jessica did not answer immediately. She sat, poised, calm, a quiet storm contained in human form. Her eyes met his for a moment, steady, unreadable, then she looked away. The pause was long, deliberate, heavy with years of patience, observation, and survival. Finally, her voice came. Quiet, but sharper than any blade. Because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, just like you didn't believe my mother. The words hit him harder than any bullet could. His chest tightened. His hands trembled slightly, though he did not show it. The empire he had built, the power he had wielded, the fear he had commanded, all of it felt hollow in that moment. He looked away. For the first time in his life, the Korean Mafia boss felt shame. Not for his enemies. Not for the rivals who had tried to destroy him. Not for the battles he had fought or the men he had punished. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own blindness. He had failed to see betrayal in plain sight. He had failed to protect the one person who mattered most. He had doubted the woman who had tried to save him, and now her daughter, the child he had thought lost forever, had returned with the truth that could destroy or rebuild everything. He swallowed hard, the silence stretching between them like a bridge both fragile and unyielding. The chandeliers above shimmered, reflecting their faces, the lines of grief, anger, and love that connected them despite decades of pain. And in that silence, he understood. The daughter who had returned was not just his child. She was his conscience, his reckoning, his warning, and his salvation, all in one. No words could erase the past. No apology could restore what had been lost. But in that quiet, heavy room, he knew that everything had changed. Because the girl who had once been invisible, hidden, underestimated, had finally been seen. And he would never look at the world, or his empire, the same way again. Jessica didn't hug him. She didn't cry. She didn't fall into his arms, and she didn't forgive him completely. Not yet. Years of fire, betrayal, and hidden truths could not be erased in a single night. She had waited, watched, and survived too much to let emotion control her now. She simply stood beside him. Not as a helpless daughter. Not as someone to protect. But as a new force in the Mafia world, sharp, dangerous, and unyielding. Her eyes, calm but focused, reflected the years of planning, patience, and silent power she had carried into the mansion. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer underestimated. The Korean Mafia boss looked at her and realized something too late. He hadn't just regained his daughter. He had created someone who might one day surpass him. Someone who could dismantle the empire he had built, rebuild it, or rule it with a precision he had never imagined. He had thought he controlled everything. Now he understood he had only controlled part of it, and that part was terrifying. The mansion, once a symbol of power and fear, now felt different. Quiet, but tense. The chandeliers glimmered like eyes watching, reflecting a world that had been shaken, exposed, and remade. The walls had absorbed the weight of betrayal, punishment, and revelation, but they also hummed with a new kind of energy. The daughter who had been hidden, underestimated, and invisible had transformed it all. Somewhere in the shadows, the enemies who survived were watching. They had seen the collapse of their allies, the humiliation of traitors, and the downfall of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. They had felt the power of a daughter who was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And they were waiting. The real war had just begun. Jessica stood beside her father, silent, dangerous, and ready. Every move he made, every decision he considered, she saw it, anticipated it, and was already prepared for what came next. She was a shadow in plain sight, a force that could strike faster than bullets, smarter than schemes, and colder than betrayal itself. The Mafia boss finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You've changed everything." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her presence alone said everything. The empire had survived fire, betrayal, and enemies from outside. But now, with her at his side, it was evolving into something greater. More intelligent, more precise, more dangerous. And the people who had plotted against them knew that the next move would not come from the boss alone. It would come from the daughter who had waited, who had learned, and who had turned silence into power. The city would soon feel the ripple of change. The elite, the rivals, the hidden enemies, they would all understand what it meant to face someone who had been underestimated for 20 years. And in that quiet mansion, under the glittering chandeliers, a father and daughter stood side by side. Not as king and subject. Not as boss and maid. But as a new dynasty. And the real story, the war, the revenge, the empire rebuilt, was only beginning.